Okay, so now in this slide, we're going to talk about how to collect data. And here I'm going to talk about primary data. If I go back to the very first slides of the lecture, we talk about the difference between primary and secondary data, right? Like primary, you need to go and collect it from the people that you are studying. And in secondary data, you already have the data. So now the focus is on collecting the data. So how to collect the data? Well, we have mainly three ways to collect quantitative data from primary source. And I will talk mostly about questionnaires, but we actually have the other two, but this is probably the most used. So questionnaire is maybe the most popular way to collect quantitative data. And you can send the questionnaire by post or telephone, which is kind of weird nowadays, but you can do it online, very popular, and also face-to-face. It's more time consuming and expensive, but it's still possible to do it face-to-face. The other ways to collect quantitative data is through interviews, which is a bit similar to the face-to-face, and the other thing that we call the critical incident technique. But these are more related to qualitative. We're going to talk about that in two more lectures, but we also can calculate quantitative data through interviews if we focus on capturing quantitative data. Like you can have an interview that is very structured and you ask for data. You ask like, how many hours do you work? That's it. You don't care about anything else. And the story behind that is only that. So do you work on, how many hours do you spend on expense claiming? Okay, so 2 hours per day. Okay, so very quantitative things, and you don't care about the story behind, because maybe they can, that's a thing that in an interview maybe they can say I work 2 hours, but it's because I have to make a, and then you say like, well, you don't say it, but you really don't care. You only care about the two. That's the only thing that matters, the number. That's why I think the interviews are more for the other, because then you don't have to do an interview to get that number two. You can send an online survey and you will get it quicker than with the interview, but you can get it. I think in the legal world, I think it's important to have an interview, even though you don't care sometimes about the context, you only care about the number, but I don't know if that's possible. And the critical incident technique is when you ask about something in specific, about a situation that you want to study in specific, and then you collect data from that. So it's kind of like kind of build a story, or kind of like that on a very specific thing. Very, like you can say like, do you recall the day when you didn't have internet? What did you do? How many hours did you, or how much time did you spend trying to fix it? That's kind of critical incident technique. Or it can be hypothetical, like imagine that you don't have internet, how much time would you dedicate to fix it? That's hypothetical. But again, I think that you don't have to do it on your own, like you can just send them a survey. And now, as I said, I want to focus more on the most popular one, questionnaires. So here are some important considerations. You can read them carefully. You can pause the video and then read them carefully. But in general, is that you should be as consistent as possible, because, and here the idea is that think about the other person, the person answering the survey or the questionnaire. You want it to be quick, you want it to be clear, you want it to be easy to answer. You don't want it to be maybe too long, too boring. So think about this kind of things. Those are this kind of suggestions in here. Only ask one question at a time, include questions that serve to cross-check with others. That's also other questions. That's also important. Like it gives you some validity. We're going to talk about this also in the quantitative lab, but take a look at some considerations in here. And then we also have, this is a bit more specific. How can we ask for quantitative data? And we have closed questions and open questions. Usually we prefer this because, and we are going to talk about this in data analysis. How do we analyze the data? It's much easier if you already have the answers, like yes or not, like never, sometimes, always. these kind of things, or how many hours you already have the numbers, because in open questions it's more difficult. Like, for example, if you tell me, what's the first thing that comes into your mind when you think about Donald Trump? And then that's an open question. And then you can say, oh, okay, so well, that is funny, or it makes me angry, or I don't like. So these are three different answers. And then when you want to analyze that, it can be difficult, right? Because maybe only one person said that he's funny, and how can you capture that? And how can you make that funny answer into one of these variables, which we already discussed previously? Are you going to make it a dummy variable when you only have one person saying it's funny? It's very difficult. Or is it going to be a kind of nominal variable, or maybe not? It's very complicated, right? So sometimes it's easier to ask closed questions. Open questions can be risky, but you can still ask them, especially if you already know that the universe of possible answers are not that many, or that you can write it. It's still possibility, but focus more on closed questions. And with that, I want to finish the lecture finally with some, and again, you will have the PowerPoint presentation in the lecture, and we can talk about this later in the actual lecture. But here are some ideas of how you can include like a mix, for example, of open and closed questions. Like, would you have the accounts audited if not legally required to do so? Yes. Yes again, or no. And then the reasons. So in that case, you care about the reasons, so you include an open question. It's a challenge to analyze it, but if it's important for you, you put it in there. Then also the multiple choice. You also can have multiple choice. So for example, is the company a family-owned business? You can say yes or no, for example, but in here, apparently they care if it is partially owned, wholly owned, partially owned, none, or not family-owned. So you have this, right? Also check how they already assign some codes. We're going to talk about the codes later, but for example, for them, 0 is that is not family business. 1 is that is wholly owned, and partially owned. So what do you think about this variable? Is this variable nominal or ordinal, or is it a scale variable? So spoiler, or the answer is that it is a nominal variable, because it only identifies categories, right? So the 0 only tells me that is this category. 2 only tells me that is this category, and 1 only tells me that is this category, right? Like, or you can even think that maybe it is a scale variable, because 0 means that is not owned. 2 that it is, no, it doesn't make sense, because partially they assign 2. It will make sense if they will do 2. Or like, for example, if you already have the percentages, that can be a scale variable, right? Like, instead of asking this, the question, yes or not, you can ask, what's the percentage of ownership by the family? So then you have 100% that will be wholly owned. Then this will be 0%. They will have to answer it like that. And here you can have some different percentages, and there will be a scale variable. So different ways to ask the same question. And then we also have this, apart from company, from who normally receives a copy of the company's accounts. So then you have different people, and you can tick yes or not. So probably this is a dummy variable. Like, if they tick this, it is 1. If it is not, it's 0. We're going to talk about that later, but I just want to spoil you a little bit. Then you also have multiple choice, kind of the same thing, yes or not. Then you have rank, so ranking. So what is the most useful? You start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so also ranking. Also intensity, and this is very related to the hypothetical constructs, this one, right? Like this one. These questions probably come from not a previous research where they have used them, or if not, they justify it in the paper. Like, what are the views of the following statements regarding audit? That you want to know the opinion about auditing in these different dimensions. So if that person agrees that it provides a check on accounting records, they say they will put 5. If not, they will put 0. So it is a way to understand a theoretical construct in a variable. And this will be a scale variable, right? Because 5 is higher, like it is supposed to be 5 times stronger than 1. That's also something important that we need to consider in the analysis. And then I think we are over with the lecture and with the videos, because we already talked about the population and the sample. We talk a lot about the variables. That's very important. We talk about data collection methods, mostly the questionnaires. We didn't talk too much about the pilot study. We can talk about it in the lecture. And finally, how to collect the data. It is basically kind of the same thing. Like here, once you decide this, you can jump to this to go and actually collect the data. So that's the end of this lecture about quantitative research. In the next lecture, we focus on analyzing the data.